Hello everybody. We're going to start in about 5 minutes. So if you want to grab yourself some pudding or a hot drink, there will be a chance again after the main content piece to eat more. We're hoping that everything will go. So, but yeah, in about 5 minutes we'll start. Will you be comfortable enough on that? You're going to... Well, you are so welcome to Holy Trinity and to this evening event. I'm Jo. I'm a person in my own right and also married to the vicar. Vicar's wife is my marital status, not my job title, though, as I like to joke, because I feel bad about how little I do for the church. Anyway, this here is Loren, who is the star of tonight's show, and also with him is Mary Ruth, without whom Loren would be a different person, and so would this book, I think. So I first met Loren's home. My family and I have a tradition of you guys come into our houses when we're not there, and we go into yours when you're not there. It's happened quite a few times over the years. But Loren's house has got a character all of its own, and it says a lot about who lives there. So I was really, really intrigued and slightly in love with Loren and Mary Ruth before I met them. So their house looks out over this beautiful bay, which has a mini little island in it. It's got the longest, most winding plant that I've ever... You still have that, don't you? The plant.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it grows over all the pots and pans that hang from their ceiling. They've got so many books and fires, not made of books, and artwork, and it's just full of memories and hospitality, and yeah, I really wish everyone could spend a weekend there of their life, maybe more. And Loren, one of my first memories of you, so when I went to Regent College, which is where Sean and I met, I did lots of Loren's classes and some of Mary Ruth's, but one of my memories, I'm going to test you on something, is on 9/11, just after while the towers were still coming down, we were in your office. What were we listening to? That's the test, because I can't remember.
I don't remember what we were listening to,
think it's on.
I don't know what we're listening to, but it was a very moving thing that you came in. Is it still not working?
There you go.
Yes. Yeah, I do remember Joe coming in on that morning, and we sort of basically just sat there and comforted each other, I think, on the morning that the 9/11 thing happened. You are, I hope, going to mention the fact that you met your husband, who is the priest at this church, in a class of mine.
On 12/11, no, 11, no, because we did the dates the other way around, but the next day I met Sean.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we take some slight responsibility for this whole thing, in a way.
Yeah. Loren and Mary Ruth have taught thousands of students, and I'm sure that most all of us would say that they have formed us in quite a significant way. So for one thing, Loren, you're in my head every time I put something in the bin or throw it away, because you used to say, "Where's away?" And so your voice says in my ear, "Where's away?" every time I throw something out. You also gave me feedback on one of my assignments that sent me back to England to try and put down roots. I don't know if you remember that, but hugely significant in specific people, but also in the environmental Christian movement. Very, very avant-garde at the time, and presumably a fair number of people thought you were a bit weird. Not me, I never thought you were weird. So I'm so happy that I get to share Loren with you this evening. It's a massive treat, and thank you so much.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
So in your book, these are just a few getting to know you questions. So in your book, you say the world tastes good. The world tastes good. And we were remembering over dinner that you hosted groups of students every other weekend in term time for years. What were some of the things that you cooked?
Oh, what did we cook? Oh, we made pasta from a pile of eggs and a pile of flour and various sauces. And we would make waffles in the morning and whatever was in the garden. You came in the fall, so a lot of times we did a lot of things with apples, including making gallons of apple juice, much of which was elevated to a higher power after I put some yeast in it.
You also say in the book that the cross is the center of a story that makes all other stories intelligible. And I know that you did a pilgrimage in which you and some others carried a giant wooden cross, and I wondered if you would tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, in many ways, that's where this book began. We had a sabbatical in 1996 at St. Andrews, and actually that's when we met Peter and Miranda, because we'd arranged for them to come as a scholar to Regent.
Can I just do a footnote? Peter and Miranda are my parents.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. All right. Yes. And we pretty much met them as we were going to England, and they lived in our house that time. But when we were in England, while we were at St. Andrews, I was doing some reading about the Celtic tradition of Christianity, and particularly was becoming impressed with the significance of the image of the Celtic cross, which I'll talk a lot more about. It's in the title of my book, Circles on the Cross. And in the process of that, we learned about a Holy Week walk across the border country between then near Glasgow over to Holy Island, Lindisfarne, and decided we would join it. A little suspicious, being good Protestants. The idea of actually doing a pilgrimage and carrying a cross seemed a little odd to us, but it was a profound experience. And to think about the cross as the center of the countryside we were walking through, and its significance for that countryside, in many ways is kind of where this book began.
Can you write your questions down and keep them, because he might answer them during the presentation? Or is it because you can't hear? Can't hear.
Please, may I be difficult?
Yes.
Please
Volume.
I think mainly about speaking a tiny bit slower with a fraction of a pause between each word. Most people, judging by the earlier laughter, can hear well, but there is a percentage of us who can't yet hear well. I apologize for being a nuisance, I do.
Not a nuisance, it would be a real shame if people came and didn't hear. So
And I
do
should
wave
say,
if...
I have my own hearing aids, by the way, as does my wife.
Please wave at us if it goes downhill. So you are a professor and a great intellect, but this is an accessible book, and I don't think you wrote it for a purely academic audience. So I'm wondering who, if you had a specific person or a group of people or a type of person in your mind while you were writing?
I think I had in mind a person who was a Christian but troubled by the way in which what the church, what other Christians practice doesn't seem to be in line with what they believe. I also, and this will be clear, I think, in what I say, wrote it for people who are not Christians, not believers, but searching for some kind of center for a passion they have for the created world. So one way I could describe the book is it's for people who are on the edge, either tempted to leave their faith or perhaps being drawn to it. So I guess that's kind of the kind of person I had in mind.
Thanks, Loren. So could you give us a brief, I know Mary Ruth, oh, sorry.
All right.
So Mary Ruth didn't want you to summarize the book, but we're going to anyway. Could you quickly summarize, sorry, Mary Ruth, could you do a brief summary?
Okay, the book begins by our situation here, as I will say a bit more, about the center of two circles, two mysteries, two miracles, the cosmos, that we live in a world, that there's anything at all, and our consciousness, our awareness of it. And then I talk about I say that the great, that's the soil from which the great trees of culture have grown. Religion and science and art are rooted in wonder. I put most of the emphasis on the book on science because it's become the most problematic, but they're all closely related: science, art, religion. So we talk about, I have a chapter on the pains of, the pleasures of science, another on the paradoxes of science, another on the pains of science. And then I look at the way the religious story that nourished our culture has been replaced by another story, and I'll say more about that, a story that really says there is no story. We're the result of an accident. And that, in some ways, is the philosophy, the default philosophy of contemporary culture, even though people can't really live within it. And so I then talk about attempts to find a new center, a religious center that perhaps is not Christian, but that doesn't believe we're an accident, something that would give us a basis for the care for creation that we feel. And so I look at things like deep ecology and ecofeminism and neo-paganism and many of these contemporary searching movements. And then I end by saying, I think there is a better way, that we perhaps need to think more deeply, more clearly, more carefully about what it means that the clearest picture we have of God, the Creator, is self self-giving love, the cross at the center of the circle of cosmos and creation. That's how the book, and then I conclude by talking about some signs of hope in this time where hope sometimes is hard to affirm. So that's the movement of the book.
Thank you. That's really helpful, actually. And so in a minute, you're going to present from some of the ideas in the book. But first, we're going to watch a film in which you star, along with Mary Ruth. Could you tell us a bit about the film?
This is an hour-long film, and we're only showing about 7 minutes of it towards the end. But it was a great gift to me. One of my colleagues at Regent was Ewan Russell Jones, who worked for many years in Wales for the BBC, doing documentaries. He's a very fine documentary filmmaker, but he came to Regent to teach. And he and I became good friends, and he had a number of talented students who wanted to make a film. And so Ewan said, maybe we could do a film about you, about this book you're writing. Well, this was about 7 years ago. Most films about books follow the book. This precedes it by several years. He's a very fine filmmaker, and I admire the film, despite the fact that I'm the main face and voice on it. It's a beautiful film, and we're going to show you just a bit of it that gives kind of an overview of some of what I'll be saying later.
So enjoy.
It's pretty evident that we've built a civilization that's predictable and regular, a world of straight lines, a city as opposed to the wilderness. Through our brilliant science and technology, we've tamed the world. We can control and manipulate it. It has no surprise or wonder for us. And yet, sometimes we're conscious of the great damage we're doing. In the midst of all our frenzied activity, we lack any sense of overall meaning and purpose. Increasingly, I've become convinced that a central clue to our relationship with creation lies in an ancient symbol of the Christian faith. This cross stands in front of our house. It looks like a stone cross. Actually, it's made by our son out of a piece of yellow cedar that washed up on the beach. I love the image of the Celtic cross. It combines such two powerful symbols. One, of course, is the circle that is kind of a picture of life and the cycles of life, and really of creation. The other is the cross. And of course, the cross is a picture of an event, the event of the crucifixion. It's a picture of the love of God, but the important thing is that the circle doesn't contain the cross. The cross contains the circle. It's bigger than the circle. And it really suggests that the love of God is at the center of creation. So what does it mean that we look at creation centered on the self-giving love of God? What does that tell us about God? What does that tell us about the nature of his involvement with creation? What does it tell us about the nature of our involvement with creation? These are hugely important questions that I've been thinking and writing about for a long time now. And in many ways, they've grown out of the work that I've done in what is generally called environmental ethics. Back in the 1970s, Mary Ruth and I started a Christian environmental studies program. Perhaps the first such program ever. We were living in the same house as our students, working on these big questions of how we treat the earth. But we also had to live with the big questions of how we treat each other, which are quite important when you're living 24 hours a day with the people that you're teaching. In the first or second semester there, it came to us that the difficulty we were having living and working and cooking with students was the same difficulty that human beings have in living and working with creation. And all of a sudden it struck us that the same pattern is essential for how we treat people as how we treat the earth. I've come to feel that the Celtic cross, with its picture of the suffering Christ at the center of the circles of creation, is in a way a picture of how we are ourselves to be in creation and to be in relationship to each other.
Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father.
What if God took the form of a servant not only for our salvation, but in a sense, in the very act of creation? What can we learn from that in how we relate to creation? The image of the Celtic cross suggests that at the very center of creation is a profound act of self-emptying. It's as though God is holding back his power in order to let creation have space to exist, to be itself, to exercise genuine freedom. I was wonderfully encouraged not long ago when I sang one of my favorite hymns, and all of a sudden realized that John Wesley was talking this way too. It's the hymn, "And Can It Be?" in which John Wesley writes, he emptied himself of all but love. Well, that's, I think, tells us a lot about how God creates, how God relates to us. What does it mean to love the world in which we find ourselves? To serve it, to wonder at it, to care for it. Perhaps one of the most beautiful and amazing things that grows out of our love for this miracle of life is art.
You can, if you want, easily access that film free online. It's called Making Peace with Creation, and if you just Google that and my name, it'll come up and you can see it. I have to make one brief apology about the film. There's a mistake on it, which somebody pointed out to me later. It wasn't John Wesley who wrote "And Can It Be?" It was his brother Charles Wesley. So I'm sorry about that. Get our technology sorted here. This is the book that I was sitting at the desk working on in that scene many years before it was finished. As you see, it's titled Circles on the Cross, and it does make considerable use of that image of the Celtic cross. Somewhere I have a clicker which advances that screen. Yes. You will see many of such crosses around England and far more in Scotland, where we just came from. Interesting history. I don't have time to go into it now, but one of the things that I think is worth noting is how different it is from two other combinations of those basic forms, the circle and the cross. One is very widespread around the world in world art. We call it the mandala. We see it in, this is not obviously a cross, but it is a square crossing of lines within a circle, and it's very common in Asian art, in Hindu art. We find it all over the world. And what's significant, I think, about these beautiful forms, and its difference from the Celtic cross, is that the circle contains the cross. It's bigger than the cross. The Christian story is quite different, and here's another use of the image of the circle and the cross from within the Christian tradition, which you're familiar with. It's sometimes called the orb of empire. You see portraits of monarchs holding such a thing. But it says something very different, doesn't it? It sees, this is an emblem of power and authority. The cross is above the circle. The circle and the cross in the Celtic cross is much different, I think, in its meaning. Go back to that other image, the circle. We live our lives in the center of two circles. Sean, this doesn't seem to be working. There we are. Yeah. All right. One of those circles is the circle of the cosmos. The other is the circle of our consciousness. I've said a bit about this already. Both are mysteries. Science can tell us a lot about both of them, about the cosmos and about the way our mind works, our consciousness. But the basic questions about them can't be answered. The basic question about the cosmos is, why is there something and not nothing? It's a basic philosopher's question. Why should there be anything at all? We can talk about how anything at all has developed from an early beginning, but there's no way to answer that question, why anything at all? Consciousness presents an equally difficult problem. Why should this collection of dust from an exploded star, and that's what we all are, be an I and not just an it? Everything else we study from the outside, but ourselves we experience from the inside. We are a self, and that's a mystery. Contemporary philosophers call it the hard problem of consciousness, and it troubles a lot of people because you can't get to that experience of being an I. The basic human response to these two mysteries that we wake up in, the circle of consciousness and the circle of the cosmos, is wonder. You see it in a child, just looking at his fingers, little 1-year-old, astonished at everything. Most of us outgrow that astonishment and forget that every day we're walking through a miracle. Again, the miracle that there is anything at all, the miracle that we're aware of it. Wonder, as I've said, which is our basic human response, is the soil from which have grown the three great trees of human culture. Religion. Religion in general. All cultures have a religion, all peoples have religion, and it's a response of thankfulness and worship. Art. Meeting the creativity that's poured out on us through our own creativity in color and sound and shape and words. And finally, science, which the book deals with the most because it's in some ways become the most problematic. Trying to understand through our own creativity how this mystery of the cosmos came to be, how it fits together, how it works. But I want to think just a minute about that first response, the religious response. In our part of the world, if we were to ask somebody to come to church, a common response will be, "Well, I'm not religious. I may be spiritual, but I'm not religious. Religious is not a popular word, but everybody has a religion." And one of the ways of recognizing that is to think about the root of the word religion. As this tries to show, the key word there is that little suffix lig, which you see in a word like ligament or ligature. Ligament is something which holds us together. Religion holds us together, whether we call it religion or not. And people hold themselves together generally by seeing themselves as taking part in a story. We all have our own little stories of our life, but there are really only two big stories within which we try to understand these mysteries of cosmos and consciousness. The foundational story to many religions, as it has been in our part of the world for many centuries, is that the cosmos is a creation. It has a purpose. But for various reasons, which I go into in quite a bit of detail in the book, that story has been eclipsed by another story, which is ironically not a story at all. It says that the cosmos is an accident. Our consciousness, too, is an accident. It's, in the words of one modern contemporary cosmologist, Edward Tryon, the universe is just one of those things which happens from time to time. It's just random, and we are random, too. We try to find ourselves within that. Now, let me share with you briefly a great poem by a person who perhaps started with that view, but came gradually to realize that there was more. Denise Levertov, an American poet. Once more, she writes, "The quiet mystery is present to me. The throng's clamor recedes. The mystery that there is anything at all, let alone cosmos, joy, memory, everything, rather than void. And that, O Lord, Creator, hallowed one, you still, hour by hour, sustain it. It's from a poem called Primary Wonder. Here's another description from a person who's tried to base his life on the other story. A great person, a great British figure, and you all know who he is. It's Bertrand Russell from his book, Why I Am Not a Christian. That man is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end they were achieving, that their origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms, that the whole temple of men's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. Well, that's not a very cheerful foundation. Actually, Bertrand Russell was a fairly cheerful sort of person, apparently, but that's not the foundation on which one can build a culture, on which one can build a life. And so it's been challenged increasingly throughout the late 20th century and in our own time. People are reluctant to turn back to a Christian center, many are, but they're reluctant to try to live their life with this kind of a framework as well. And several things have challenged this story. One of the things is a realization that the universe is more complicated than we thought. In fact, it seems to have a story too. In fact, it seems to have had a beginning. It was in the second half of the last century, the 20th century, that we began to see strong evidence that the cosmos had a beginning. It hasn't always been. This was not a popular idea among many scientists. Pressing the wrong button here. E.R. Eddington, who was a physicist and mathematician in the 20th century, said, philosophically, the notion of a beginning to the present order of nature is repugnant to me. And Fred Hoyle, another prominent British astronomer who many of you will know, elaborated a bit on that. I take these quotes from a book by Angela Tilby in which she interviewed a number of contemporary cosmologists in the late 20th century. She writes, Fred Hoyle has admitted that his steady-state theory, and he's the one who kind of developed the steady-state theory, the idea that hydrogen atoms just sort of pop into being out of nothing and the universe keeps maintaining itself steadily. And he also is the one who invented the term Big Bang, completely derisively, because he simply didn't believe it. The idea that the universe began in a Big Bang, he rejected. He said that his steady-state theory held a deep emotional appeal for him because it was the farthest away from the account of Genesis. Alan Guth, the inventor of the inflation hypothesis, a way to try to bring quantum mechanics and cosmology together, told me when I met him that the majority of scientists had shared Hoyle's view. They liked the steady-state theory because they assumed that it got round the creation problem. If the universe is as it has always been, then there's never been a first moment or a beginning. It does not need to be explained, it simply is. And yet, the evidence that the universe had a beginning has become unavoidable, along with a whole set of other principles that show that the universe is incredibly fine-tuned for our existence, called the anthropic principle. If it were any different, we couldn't be here, and there's no reason it has to be that way. So that's one of the reasons why the the idea that the universe is an accident has been challenged. It seems to be more meaningful and more purposeful than we thought, even though, and it's the non-believing scientists often who found this out, but it's a trouble. Another reason why that idea that the universe, that we are an accident, has been challenged in our time is, I think, well represented by this photo, which has sometimes been called the picture that changed the world. It was that picture of the Earth rising above the lifeless horizon of the moon, taken by the first astronauts to go around the moon. It shows so vividly how unique in the cosmos the Earth seems to be. Of course, we don't know. There may be other such planets, but the contrast between the lifeless horizon of the moon and that living surface is very striking. And it has also become a kind of emblem of the fragility of the Earth, the value of the Earth. Marilyn Robinson, a contemporary novelist, puts it this way. Say the universe has no boundary and that the stars are numberless. Still, there's an infinite qualitative difference between life and the most opulent and glorious reaches of lifelessness. If life is as extraordinary as it appears to be, if it is unique to this planet, as it may well be, then it is within human power to make an infinite qualitative difference in the cosmos by erasing this singularity. Because of that, we are, and I'm quoting here Charles Taylor, a Canadian philosopher, we are at the beginning of a new age of religious searching, whose outcome no one can foresee. And I've mentioned some of these searches: deep ecology, bioregionalism, ecofeminism, neo-paganism, a return in interest in indigenous religions, and what we could call environmentalism itself is a kind of religion for many people. All of these are searching for an answer to the question, what does it mean to be human? How do we fit in? It's a question that I think troubles this puzzled penguin on a beach. What do humans mean anyway? What is this? What's going on here? Let me just give you a very quick glimpse of some of the wonder of the human presence. Here's someone simply having a good time. Here's a child delighting in a whole pile of flowers. Here's an artist crafting a violin. So we're capable of doing these things. We're also capable of this. A whole river full of garbage. Or this, again, more probably a Chinese person sorting bottles from our part of the world when we used to ship them there. Now they don't accept them anymore, and we're trying to change our habits. Or this, a sheer destruction that we're capable of. An American anthropologist, Loren wrote, "It's with the coming of man that a vast hole seems to open in nature, a vast black whirlpool spinning faster and faster, consuming flesh, stone, soil, minerals, sucking down the lightning, wrenching power from the atom until the ancient sounds of nature are drowned in the cacophony of something which is no longer nature, something instead which is loose and knocking at the world's heart, something demonic and no longer planned, escaped it may be, spewed out of nature, contending in a final giant's game against its master. Oops. Yeah, back to this picture. Well, yes, we can agree with that grim view of the presence of a person, of humanity in creation, and yet we know better. Christians especially know better, because we believe, as those of you who went to this church heard a sermon this Sunday on, mention what it means to be in the image of God. I want you to look at this picture for a minute, because I'm going to come back to it, but there's three things about it I want you to notice. One is, again, that picture of the Celtic cross. Another is that that island, and I'll return to that in a minute. Another is the image of the rainbow, and I will return to that as well. So how do we fit in? How can this be a creation of a good God when science seems to explain it and we seem to find no meaning in it? This is a picture of a cloud of expanding stardust taken by the James Webb Telescope, this marvelous tool that's only been up there for a few years. There's a sense, though, in which perhaps the James Webb Telescope helps us answer the question, what does it mean to be human? Because of a profound coincidence. Do you know when the James Webb Telescope was launched? Well, it was launched in December 21st, in 2021, on Christmas Day. Now, that's completely an accident. There was bad weather days earlier. Nobody planned to launch it on Christmas Day in French Guiana. I think it's God's sense of humor, actually, because on that day, I think here's a picture of it being launched. Here's a picture of it receding from its final stage as it heads out to its orbit. Here's an artist's rendering of it fully deployed. Here are some of the things it's shown us, this star nursery, as they say, stars being born, this picture of some of the earliest galaxies at the very edge of the universe, of the cosmos. As the satellite was being launched, Christmas texts were being read all around the world. The most familiar, sorry, I'm trying to speak through my sugar. The most familiar of those texts are the fully detailed stories in Matthew and Luke. John seems to omit a story about the birth of Jesus, which is kind of strange when you think about it. If, in fact, Mary lived her last years with John, you'd think that she would be able to tell him lots of those stories. John doesn't tell those stories. We learn about the shepherds and the wise men and so forth from the other Gospels. John seems to omit a story about the birth of Jesus, but only apparently. John is the cosmic gospel. The word cosmos occurs only a few times in the other Gospels, but over 70 in John. Same is true of the word for life. The birth, life, and death of Jesus gives a center, as the Celtic cross shows us, to the true story of the cosmos. It's not an accident, but a creation. We can say that John begins with the answer to questions about life and the cosmos, which the James Webb satellite is looking for. Information about, is there life, is there other life? How did the universe begin? Those are questions we hope to answer through these things. In some sense, John begins with them. So in that context, listen to these familiar words. The Son I'm skipping. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. The birth of Jesus gives us a clue, and the whole life and death of Jesus gives us a clue to the nature of the Creator. And thus, I think, to the nature of creation and the nature of our place in it. Paul picks up on this same insight in one of his epistles. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things are created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things. That phrase, all things, occurs, I think, 6 times. Paul wants us to get the point. Now, this reminds me of a passage that some of you have heard recently. How many of you happened to be in this church last Sunday? Several of you. You heard a sermon by Tim Lewis that was on this text from Genesis 9, the covenant between God and Noah and every creature. The Son, let me make my own. I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you and with every living creature. I'm not reading the whole passage, but that phrase, every living creature, occurs 6 times in this passage. It sort of prefigures that all things in Colossians. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures on the earth. Now, this is a very interesting, and we often don't see the full significance of this. Remember that rainbow in the picture of the cross outside our house. You've all seen rainbows, and we know of them as the remainder of this covenant. And yet, the Hebrew word translated rainbow is everywhere else in the Bible translated simply bow. So the translators are fudging a little bit. I mean, we know it is a rainbow that God is referring to, but primarily and first of all, the word describes a weapon. The imagery is clear. With this, and then think of it, a bow, if it's a weapon, if it's a drawn bow, where is it pointing? It's pointing upwards. It's pointing towards where people associate God being. God is making himself vulnerable to creatures. Now, as Tim pointed out in his sermon on Sunday, this covenant is renewed and fulfilled in the cross. God empties himself for creation, but that willingness of the Creator to risk himself for creation is there at the very beginning. You are familiar with this passage from Philippians 2. It occurred in the film that we just saw. Your attitude, speaking of each of us, and here we're moving now to the practical questions. How does this affect how we live? Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing. And other translations are emptied himself, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. He humbled himself, became obedient to death, even death on a cross. That, it seems to me, is caught well in this painting. It's a painting that you may recognize on the cover of my book. Let me tell you a little bit about it. When was it? Shortly after we moved to Galliano, an Australian artist, Lindsay Farrell, came to Regent to study landscape painting and its relationship to Christianity. He was impressed by the difference of the landscape around British Columbia from the landscape of Australia. We took a hike to a mountain up in the nearby. We had a lake that was usually covered with ice, but it was ice-free late in the summer. It reminded him of the desert lakes in Australia. And he also was aware that there was then, as there continues to be, big arguments about logging in British Columbia. How should we treat these vast forests that are now thoroughly diminished? One of you said, I was talking to before, said you'd just come back from Vancouver Island. In 1950, 3/4 of the virgin forests on Vancouver Island were there. By 1980, only 1/4 remained. They're going very, very fast. And this struggle in a complicated way reached our island. Now, Lindsay went to a church in Vancouver, and the church arranged with a local shopping center to have Lindsay paint a painting during Holy Week, the week before Easter. And so he painted this triptych. It's large. It's 3 feet by 9 feet. And it's called Easter Journey. And you may recognize that the figure on the left is that island. It's the island in front of our house, covered with trees, covered with forest. But the figure in the center is the same island, clear-cut, logged. Of course, that's not all it is. Sometimes people see the other double image first, sometimes second. It also, as you trace the horizon line, those hills become an arm, and you see that the figure is also the crucified Christ with a crown of thorns, embracing the island on one side, and a figure on the other side, which is both that lake that we'd hiked to up in the mountains, but also an empty tomb. I was able to persuade my publisher to put this on the cover of my book because I think it sums up a great deal of what the book is about. And you see that in a way by recognizing that Lindsay's painting is in dialogue with a very famous painting by Salvador Dali, The Christ of St. John of the Cross. It's a justly famous painting, but it's wrong in some important ways. It's suspended above the earth. It's distant. Whereas Lindsay's painting Christ is with us. He's embedded. The suffering Christ is at the heart of creation, as the Celtic cross is at the heart of those circles of cosmos and our consciousness. So what about our consciousness? About what does it mean if we are to have the mind of Christ? If we are to shape our life after the one who emptied himself for us, who emptied himself for creation, what does that imply for our action? Well, let me conclude by answering that in terms of a famous poem by a favorite poet of many of us, Gerard Manley Hopkins. It's called As Kingfishers Catch Fire, Dragonflies Draw Flame. And this is a kingfisher just emerging. It's a good example of the kind of thing we wonder at. And by the way, while I mention that, don't leave without appreciating these wonderful photos, which are themselves an appreciation of wonder. They're showing wonder at the natural world. They're paying attention to the miracle of the things that are part of the cosmos. What should our relationship to that be? Well, listen to this fairly complicated poem, but I think it has a profound message which I want to leave you with. As kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame, as tumbled over rim in roundy wells stones ring, like each tucked string tells, each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same, deals out that being indoors each one dwells, selves, goes itself, myself it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. Now, let me stop there and try to unpack those dense, beautiful words. He's saying that everything in creation selves, goes, it has a self, but it speaks itself. It's projecting itself. And it's summed up, everything says, in a sense, what I do is me, for that I came. You can see that again illustrated wonderfully in some of these photos. And we do that too. We each are our unique selves, conscious, aware of ourselves, but we project ourselves. We say, what I do is me, and it's sometimes a problem, the self-obsession of our time. But that's one kind of selving, the selving that we do ourselves, that every creature does itself. Hopkins continues, I say more. The just man justices. What does he mean by justice? Well, you'd have to read some of his other work to understand this, but what he means in the context of this poem is that we not only selve ourselves, we have the capacity to act justly towards others, to create a space in which other selves can appear. This is most obviously true among people, but it's especially true, it's also true of our relationship towards the natural world. We can impose our human self on the world in such a way that the selves that are there are obscured, are eclipsed. Or we can live in such a way through what we build, what we eat, what we throw away, that as much as possible gives a self, a space for other creatures to be. That's the human task. That's what it means to have the mind of Christ in terms of Philippians 2. Christ who gives himself that we might have selves. That's the pattern for our own action. The just man justices, acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is Christ. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs, lovely in eyes not his, to the Father through the features of men's faces. We can be, through Christ, little Christs in the world and in our relationship to others and to the world. Let me really close now by reading you another poem. It's actually a hymn by an English clergyman some of you may have heard of, called W.H. Vanstone, that wonderfully, I think, sums up what it means that the suffering Christ, the self-giving God, is at the center of creation. This is a poem called The Risk of Love by W.H. Vanstone. He begins by listing all of the delights of our experience of the created world. Morning glory, starlit sky, leaves in springtime, swallows' flight, autumn gales, tremendous seas, sounds and scents of summer night, soaring music, towering words, art's perfection, scholar's truth, joy supreme of human love, memory's treasure, grace of youth. Open, Lord, are these thy gifts, gifts of love to mind and sense. Hidden is love's agony, love's endeavor, love's expense. Love that gives evermore, gives with zeal, with open hands, spares not, keeps not, all outpours, ventures all, its all expends. Drained is love in making full, bound in setting others free, poor in making many rich, weak in giving power to be. Therefore, he who thee reveals hangs, O Father, on that tree, helpless, and the nails and thorns tell of what thy love must be. Thou art God, no monarch thou, throned in easy state to reign. Thou art God, whose arms of love, aching, spent, the world sustain. He's describing the action of God towards creation and towards us, but as we know from that text in Paul, we are to have the mind of Christ. And this sets a pattern for us, for our action in the world. So I leave you with this image and invite you to think about what it means that at the center of our own understanding, the center of our own consciousness, at the center of the cosmos is the self-giving God. Thank you.
Gosh, that was rich, and I'm sure we'll all be having thoughts over the coming days and weeks as it percolates through. But if anyone's got questions, comments, more stories to add to the mix, we have a bit of time for conversation. And I'm going to come with a roving mic.
You don't need to disguise a comment as a question. So if you want to say something, feel free to say it.
Yeah, don't hang back. One night only, everyone. Sadly. One night only, and then you're off, aren't you? So this is your chance. You don't have to say anything either.
I just want to say thank you for expressing it so deeply and clearly and wonderfully. And I guess many people might say, what now? What now? What can I do? What can I do more? And I guess you've given us many, many clues. But I guess what can people take away practically as well? I know you've given us so many clues.
Yeah, this is what I described as kind of lofty and hypothetical, not hypothetical, but abstract. And so what do we do? Well, the first thing I think is to pay attention, as these photos make clear, is to live aware that we are in a miracle that is fragile in some ways. It's tough, but it's fragile, and it's changing, it's diminishing. You know all of the bad news. But another thing I think we can do is take comfort in what that figure in the right in that painting shows, that at the end of the story is resurrection. And the resurrection it's the beginning of the new creation. And one of the problems, I think, with the environmentalism as a religion is without an understanding of the story that the Creator is telling, it does lead to despair. And depression and suicide is not that uncommon among environmentally passionate people because they don't see much hope. And yet we know that, first of all, it's not up to us, but that God is at work, that He will bring about the fulfillment of the promise of the resurrection, and that we have the privilege of working in that restoration to the new creation. One of my favorite pictures of this is from an odd little detail of the Gospel of John. Remember in John's account, all of the accounts, the first one to the tomb is Mary. And she comes, she looks in and sees the body is not there. She goes out weeping. She asks a man she mistakes as the gardener, do you know where he is? And John says she mistook him for the gardener. And then he says Mary, and she recognizes that it is the resurrected Christ. So that's a mistake by Mary, but it's not really a mistake, because to see Jesus as the gardener on the first day of the week, the first day of a new creation, is in a sense to give us back Adam's task, to give us back our task to be gardeners, carers for creation. So I'm preaching here. So, any other comments, questions? Yes.
Oh, I've got it. Don't worry.
I love poetry, and I had to look up that beautiful one about kingfishers is Gerald Manley Hopkins, and what tremendous insight he has. But have you come across the poetry of Louise Gluck, an American poet, and who's written a most wonderful poem called The Wild Iris, which seems to be dead, but resurges like a resurrection. And it's a religious poem, but I thought you might like that. Louise Gluck.
Louise Gluck.
And it's called The Wild Iris. I think you'd like it.
You can't quote it for us, can you? Can you quote it for us?
She's American.
What? Louise Gluck. You can't quote the poem for us, can you? Okay, thank you.
I'm not certain I'm going to be able to articulate this, but I'm going to give it a go. First of all, thanks for a fantastic talk, really very, very interesting and insightful. I've worked my whole career with secular environmentalists and especially environmental scientists. I would say that few of them align themselves with Bertrand Russell and that sort of nihilism or hopelessness. But many more of them make environmentalism or nature their god, or somehow becomes a quasi-religion in the absence of anything else. And one thing I've been trying to focus on since I retired last year is how can we take the truths of the Bible and the way in which we present the gospel in a way that speaks to this community that I've lived in all my life, because I don't think we do that as church. We simply don't. We still present the gospel almost entirely human-centered, almost entirely individual human-centered. And what we say, it's not that it's not true, it's just a rather emaciated form of how I understand the Bible's teaching as the work of the cross and of Christ. And I wonder if you have insights on how we might talk about the work of the cross and the gospel in a way that reaches to a very secularized world that often loves nature and creation and is very put off by the church. I'm caught in this trap. Any insights?
Well,
I'd love to know them.
Certainly know the problem. I think the best answer I can give is to work along with them as a Christian, not hiding your Christianity, but not preaching at them either necessarily. And I know of no organization in the world that does that better than Russia, which of course have a good connection with. And I don't know that you should all notice that the preface, the forward to my book is by Peter Harris, who along with his family, founded Russia years ago. Russia, if you don't know, is an organization that sees the care of creation as a Christian ministry. Peter was an Anglican priest, but he saw his work for creation as much a part of ministry as everything else. And Russia has done a wonderful job of doing that all over the world with other groups who are at first suspicious of because they hear they're Christian, and then realize they're doing good work. So I would certainly encourage you to support Russia if you possibly can, and you're in a very good place to know more about it because Peter Harris attends this church. What? Well, yeah, I mean, another good example to me is we just came from visiting some former students who were in Scotland, and they, after coming to Regent, he was a forester, he went back with a much bigger vision of forestry as a part of restoring God's good creation, not just planting more trees to make more money for somebody, and became sought after as a consultant because other people are realizing, and landowners, estate owners, are realizing they want to do this too, and he had a bigger story. And so he's founded his own company called Tree Story. It has about 30 employees now. They've planted about 50 million trees in the last 7 years. But not just planting trees, they're restoring ecosystems. They aren't doing it as a Christian organization, but they are doing God's work. And the other, I think, obvious thing to say is that we just simply need to, all of us, be aware that we are living in a miracle, in God's miracle, and that everything we do counts, even though it seems small. And you're tired of hearing about the need to recycle and so forth, and avoid waste. But those do matter. They're a part of being a Christian, it seems to me. So, yeah, and along with rejoice, along with reuse and recycle, keep the most important word: rejoice. Rejoice. That's what it means to be alive in this world that God's given us. Another comment or question?
I can see several more hands, but I think, Loren, do you think it's possible to do pithy answers?
Do I think what?
Pithy, short, succinct answers, and then we can fit in 3 questions.
All right.
Yeah? Okay, so 1, 2 at the back, and then 3. No? Or you're just pointing? Okay, so but still be pithy and succinct.
Pithy. I'll try to remember.
Yeah, thank you very much. Amazingly stimulating. I've got two questions, if I may. One is, I think you said at the beginning that God's relationship with the environment is like our relationship with each other. Is that what you said? And if so, what did you mean by that? And secondly, do you think God's going to allow us to destroy his planet?
What was the wording of that last question?
Will God allow us to destroy his planet?
Pithy answer, no.
Yay! Let's finish there, shall we?
What I meant by that first answer is, I think what we learned is that we, in living with other students and recognizing that Philippians 2 was a kind of the self-emptying that he talks about, is something that we need to do in relationship to each other, as we need to do in our relationship to the natural world. It's not just there for us to use, it's there for us to care for, to make a space for, to allow self to appear. And the clearest example we have of that pattern is Christ. And that's why I think that's what I meant. Yeah, leave it at that. I'm
Excellent, excellent. No, that was great. Okay, thank you. Last question.
Thank you so much for such an inspiring talk. And just one thing I thought, because somebody raised it about what can we do, and I think one of the things we should do is not to be daunted by the greatness of the task. And as Mother Teresa said, we cannot do great things, but we can do small things with great love.
That's a very, you've given your own answer. What can we do? We can do small things with great love, quoting Mother Teresa. Yes.
So, in putting this evening together, Carolyn and I wanted to embody some of the richness of the themes of your book in art, poetry, and so we asked my daughter Caris to write a song for this evening. She's 14 and very brave, and can you come up? So, have a short musical interlude. Thank you, love.
I'm just going to draw the evening to a close. We still have time to enjoy each other's company and to help ourselves to some more food and another drink. We've made some more decaffeinated coffee. It won't keep you awake. It's a lovely time to enjoy one another as well as to reflect on what we've heard this evening. I think you've been thanked for coming, but we are very grateful that you've made the effort to come. We know that quite a number of people did want to come and haven't been able to, so one of the things we're doing as a result is we're going to put the recording of this on our church website. So if you want to revisit it, you'll find it there for a little while. Please do tell anyone you know who wants to hear it that it will be there. And also, if there's anyone you know who you think might like to hear it, that it's there. It comes in a week when we've been celebrating creation and harvest, as those of you who come here know. And we have, at the same time, updated our website on the church about what we're attempting to do to live in God's image in the right relationship and facing the right way towards his creation. There's a lot more that we can think about as well as a lot more we can do. So any interaction with that, you can again look on the website and see if there's anything that sparks your imagination. My name's Carolyn, if you don't know me, and I'm a sort of person involved in it, so please feel free to talk to me. Also Jo. She and I have really enjoyed putting this evening together. We obviously couldn't have done it without a lot of help from other people, could we, Jo? Where have you gone? The lovely desserts, thanks to several people. I'm not going to name them, not everyone knows them, but thank you very much. 2 of them are sitting there, mind you. And thanks to Sean and to Jo herself for all the time put into this evening. Obviously, thanks to Loren and Mary Ruth. It definitely couldn't have happened without you. We really hope that we can do more of these kind of things. So perhaps any ideas along those sorts of lines, not that they'll be quite as unique as this is particularly unique, but we love to share and talk more about our wonderful Creator. Loren's book is available, and we only have 7 copies tonight, so it's first come, first served. It's cash if possible. If you can't do cash and you've only got a card, we need to write your name down, and I will personally be in touch with you in order to make it happen. If we run out of the 7 books and you still want a book, you write your name down and you say separately to Elaine, who's sitting here behind, I would like to order a book. We can't actually tonight take payment. I had hoped we could, but we can't. But if you write your name and your email down and you want to order a book, again, I will pick this up and we'll do what we can. The reason we're trying to do that tonight is that we can get it at a substantial discount from the retail price, which is expensive, but the book at half the retail price is £20. It's a very substantial book, and we're glad to be able to offer it at a discount. I know that still seems a lot, but not for a lifetime's work. Secondly, about money, we're not charging for tonight, but there is a little, what would you call this, plate for any donations for A Rocha International. Again, it's cash, but if you have a card for donations, we have Jo with the A Rocha International card reader. So that will work. So please feel free if you would like to do that. Lauren's already mentioned the photos, but this came out of our Sunday afternoon. It's the photo competition for Wild About Bath, and they really are worth a look. I'll be taking them down tomorrow, so tonight's the last opportunity.
And they've been judged, and there's a winner. Mark, which is the winning picture? Oh, Christine Absalon has won with this beautiful picture. So this is the winner of all of these beautiful pictures. Oh, all of them, did you say? Oh, that's one of the main ones.
I think that's everything. So we said we would finish at 9:30, and we do like to finish then, so that people don't feel that they're being held back from getting their good night's sleep. But at the same time, if you're chatting and enjoying one another, that's absolutely fine. But you do obviously have permission to go whenever you feel ready. There's more coffee, and we have to particularly thank the coffee makers because it's a time-consuming task, and it's all, as I say, decaffeinated. So enjoy the rest of the evening. Have I forgotten anything, Joe?